is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Nawied Jabarkhyl. Our top stories. China cuts high-level military talks with the United States and suspends other cooperation following the controversial visit to Taiwan of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
And China's military drills, the United States has called an escalation, continue into a second day.
Turkey's President Erdogan meets Vladimir Putin in Russia, with Ukraine and Syria dominating talks.
America is working. More than 500,000 new jobs added to the world's biggest economy. Unemployment in the US is the lowest in 50 years.
While in Greece, more than 200,000 job vacancies are up for grabs. So why aren't they being filled?
China has cut communications with the United States on a range of issues following that controversial visit to Taiwan by the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has announced a list of countermeasures which include cancelling dialogue between high-level military leaders and defence officials, as well as a maritime military agreement between the two nations. Other measures include suspending cooperation with the US on the repatriation of illegal migrants, cross-border crime prevention, drugs control and climate change talks.
China has also sanctioned Nancy Pelosi and her family over her trip to Taiwan. Beijing says Pelosi insisted on the visit, despite China's opposition calling it a gross interference in its internal affairs. It says the move threatens peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
Well, it comes as China carried out live-fire military drills for a second day around Taiwan. The exercises are expected to last until Sunday.
Beijing says the drills are a deterrence against US-Taiwan interference. The United States has summoned China's ambassador to the White House in response, calling the military actions irresponsible. Our correspondent Meng Quangsheng reports.
The targeted military operations around Taiwan Island have completed a second day. The locations cover 6 different areas around the island. And on Friday, the PLA's Eastern Theater Command has conducted joint combat exercises and training in the northern, southwestern and eastern waters and airspace of the island. On Thursday, its Air Force and Naval Aviation Corps flew over 100 warplanes, including fighters and bombers. They conducted exercises such as joint reconnaissance, area refueling and strikes on ground targets. And more than 10 destroyers and frigates from the Navy conducted joint blockade operations. Experts say the exercises are far more intense than ever before and are aimed at strengthening the deterrent. It's the first time live-fire tests have crossed over Taiwan Island and passed through an airspace where US Patriot missiles are densely deployed. It's also the Chinese military's first encirclement of Taiwan, and the first time it set a shooting range to the east of the island. China's aircraft carrier formation has also taken part in the operations. The drills are due to continue until midday Sunday. Meng Qingsheng, CGTN, 厦门。
The conflict in Ukraine and a possible new military offensive in Syria have dominated the talks between Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart, President Erdogan, at the Black Sea resort of Sochi.
Russia has paid tribute to Turkey for not imposing sanctions on Moscow in the wake of the Ukraine invasion, saying it ensured the supply of Russian gas to Europe. Ankara is seeking a deal with Russia that would allow its forces to launch a new operation into Kurdish-controlled parts of northern Syria. Let's speak to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow, and a reminder that journalists in Russia are working under media laws which restrict what they can report. Stuart, the Turkish president then coming to these talks with several requests. What's been happening?
That's right. Several requests, but the main one certainly permission or at least acknowledgement by Russia that Turkey can go ahead with its operation into Syria without coming into conflict with Russian, Iranian or Syrian forces there, because it's something that Moscow and Tehran and even Washington are concerned could destabilize the region after President Vladimir Putin just earlier on Friday said that Russia and Turkey had made a very big contribution to the normalization of the situation in Syria. But there are also trade concerns to be discussed between Turkey and Russia. For example, the Turk Stream gas pipeline, which goes from Russia to Europe, it's one of 4 physically present, but the only one that's still working. And President Vladimir Putin said Europe should be thankful that Turkey has managed to keep this properly, rhythmically and without failures operational for both consumers in Turkey and in Europe. And there's also discussion this time in Ankara trying to make sure that its nuclear power plant project in southern Turkey goes ahead with Russia's Rosatom, the nuclear regulator and also in charge of all nuclear affairs in Russia, is trying to help Turkey build this plant. It's something that the President Erdogan says will create around 10% of Turkey's future energy. So it's of critical importance for Turkey to get this arranged at this talk in Sochi.
And these sorts of visits to Moscow are a lot rarer nowadays. What does Russia want, particularly over the conflict in Ukraine?
Yes, that's one of the main things that will be discussed, we believe, between the two presidents. So far, Turkey has shown its usefulness when it comes to the crisis with Russia and Ukraine in providing at least some progress when it comes to the export of Ukrainian grain. Now these ships are moving again, and President Erdogan is keen to use that momentum developed to try to find further arrangements that might be able to eventually provide some kind of path to peace. But there's been no real emphasis in Moscow or Kiev at the moment about trying to establish some kind of route to peace, because both sides still feel they can use the current situation to their advantage. And so although it's something that we believe may be discussed, we're not expecting any major developments. Then there's another thing that Turkey can provide to Russia right now of critical importance is import substitution. With Russia heavily sanctioned, it's difficult for it now to get goods from abroad, especially from Europe. And there's potential there for Ankara to be able to facilitate deliveries through third-party countries and be able to get goods into Russia that otherwise would not be able to be brought in. So that's all part of a trade deal, which after this meeting is possible will be signed between both presidents.
Thanks for that, Stuart. That's our correspondent, Stuart Smith in Moscow.
3 more grain ships have departed from Ukrainian ports. They're now heading to Istanbul for inspection. On Monday, the first grain ship set sail from the port of Odessa under a United Nations brokered deal with Moscow, and Kyiv is calling for this to be extended to other cargoes, including metals. The first inbound cargo vessel since Russia's invasion is also due in Ukraine later. The Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther is in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. Philip, this grain deal on shipping seems to be working, at least so far.
Yes, absolutely. That would be the conclusion at this point. Of course, these ships are not entering and exiting the Black Sea and indeed these Ukrainian ports as quickly as they did in the past and as quickly as they would want to. This is a mined Black Sea, after all, a very dangerous place to do shipping right now. But so far, the deal is working. This is a deal, of course, that was signed by Russia and Ukraine, that was brokered by Turkey and the United Nations. And it is indeed Turkey that is checking these cargo vessels, making sure that they are sticking to the deal on all sides of this deal. This means, for example, that, of course, there should be no weapons shipments on board these vessels going toward Ukrainian ports, for example, and that there should not be anything on board these vessels that should not be on board going in the other direction, exiting Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is only allowed to transport grain, fertilizer and food on board these cargo ships. Now, all of these ships, by the way, being escorted by Ukrainian boats as well. This is because these are mined seas, of course, as I just mentioned. And, of course, this is going to take a very long time to get all of this grain out of Ukraine, specifically silos and these ports that are now again in use. It's 20 million tons of grain that need to get out of these ports. That's an enormous amount, and it's going to take a very, very long time to get to some kind of normality again. Now, the hope is that at some point in the future, we will be able to look back at this deal, a minor deal, but something that was signed on the dotted line by Russia and Ukraine as maybe, hopefully, a precursor to some kind of a peace or ceasefire agreement between the two parties that, of course, looks very unlikely right now.
Philip, let's talk about the military action. What of the latest developments on the ground?
Well, there have been further warnings in the eastern Donbass region, and specifically from the governor of the Donetsk area, Kirilenko. He says that people should be evacuating right now. He says that there is shelling and that there is bombing from the Russian side going on all the time, and that people who do not evacuate right now risk being killed in their sleep. This is according to the governor of the Donetsk region. This is not the only place that is being hit, though it is the one that is being hit hardest by Russia right now. It is being pummeled, but other cities as well. Mykolaiv is a particularly important one in the south. I spoke to a man who lives there, Ole, a short while ago. He used to live in the Russian-occupied Kherson region, fled to Mykolaiv. He says that is definitely not a safe place to be either right now. It has been hit particularly hard over the last 2 weeks. He tells me that there are no parts of that city that are safe right now. Similar stories in other cities. Zaporizhia is also being hit repeatedly by Russian shelling, and also Kharkiv. Kharkiv is the second largest city here in Ukraine. It's in the northeast, close to the Russian border. There had been Russian attempts to get it under its control that failed. Soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers in the Kharkiv region, tell us today that they are very aware of a new Russian military hardware buildup in that region, and they are also aware of the possibility of maybe another Russian attempt for an offensive on the city of Kharkiv. Again, a very important place and Ukraine's second largest city.
Philip, thank you for that. Philip Crowther from the Associated Press in Ukraine.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. 500,000 new jobs added to the world's biggest economy as US unemployment hits its lowest rate in 50 years.
Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strained supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, people are feeling the heat. Join us for a special new series, Crunch Time, starting August the 1st, here on CGTN.
This week on Razor, the power of red light to recharge retinal cells, and measuring the intelligence of birds by seeing if they understand magic.
Corvids use these intricate techniques or tactics of deception, which resemble some of the tactics that we do.
So they're doing magic with their mates?
They do a sleight of beak, if you will.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Unit. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
More than 500,000 new jobs were added to the world's biggest economy last month. The unemployment rate in the United States has now fallen to 3.5%. That's the lowest level it's been in 50 years. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, these figures way ahead of economists' expectations. How could they get it so wrong?
I know. Nawied and Jamie, no one really knows, to be honest with you. It did come as a bit of a shock at 8:30 this morning local time. I mean, I've tried to say this on our program in the past, and I heard on the radio here this morning a great way of explaining this, so I'll do it for you now, which is that once upon a time on Wall Street, or indeed wherever you are in the world, you looked up and you saw the stars and you saw the planets, and the planets came and went in their seasons, and we all went round the sun once every 365 days, and now we don't. economically speaking. It's as simple as that. Everything is up in the air because of COVID, because of Ukraine, because of supply chain issues. We're all over the place, really. I mean, this prediction, Nawied, was double what had been expected by all the senior economists on Wall Street. It was 528,000 new jobs added in the month of July. The unemployment rate down to 3.5%. And then I don't know how relevant this is to people all around the world, but productivity was down a little bit. The participation rate was down a little bit. Wages were up about 0.5%. And there's a little clue in all of that, which tells you why is it then that we're being told there are 2 jobs open for every 1 job that people are applying for? Something is not quite right here. Now, of course, if you've got a job, if you're one of the 528,000, good for you. That's fantastic. I'm sure that's important. But Wall Street is down today because it means that the Federal Reserve is likely to be as aggressive as it has been when it meets in September and November in order to try and combat inflation the only way they can, which is to raise interest rates, likely to be 75 basis points now. And of course, the fear is, and the reason Wall Street is down, is because they worry that the Federal Reserve is going to blunder into raising interest rates because that's what it has to do and cause a recession that might actually be really quite damaging. No one knows. So for now, Nawied, the Dow is down 0.4%. The Nasdaq, within seconds of this news coming out, was down 1%, and it still is. And the S&P 500 is down almost 1%. And then the 10-year interest rate, which affects technology stocks, that is it's up a little bit now, about 14 basis points up compared to where it was yesterday, and that's why the techs are suffering today. Nawied.
And if you could look into your crystal ball then, John, what happens next?
I will, and I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the problem. The thing is, next Wednesday we have another big day, because it's interesting. For years, for all my entire career, basically, this has been the biggest economic data published anywhere in the world, the monthly US jobs report. And now, not so much, because the CPI report, which is the Consumer Price Index, which tells us how much more per month and per year people are paying in the shops and the gas stations. That is actually more important now to economists, and it comes out next Wednesday, which is the 10th of August. Now, the Federal Reserve doesn't meet until September. They've got another CPI before they meet coming in, and they've got Jackson Hole, which is the big economic symposium in Wyoming, coming up as well. And now we have members of the FOMC, the committee that decides on interest rates, briefing against Chairman Powell. He's been rather sanguine about things, and they're much more kind of hawkish about the chances of recession. And I think it is being noted here what the Bank of England said yesterday, that extraordinary statement coming out of Andrew Bailey, predicting inflation in the UK by 13% by the end of the year, increasing his interest rate there by 50 basis points, and definitely talking about a recession in the UK. That hasn't really impacted much on Wall Street yet, and I think that that will sink in, and now they'll put this into the equation, and I think it will rather sink in. It was remarkably candid of the Bank of England. So that's where we're at the moment. Can I just, before I go, can I tell you very quickly, because for years we've been talking about the BBB, the Build Back Better, which is this big democratic bill, the big social spending wish list that deals with climate and health and tax. Well, they're finally going to sign it into law this weekend. They've got all the senators on board. They've renamed it. They call it the Inflation Reduction Act. Some people think it's not inflation reductionary at all, but it will come before the Senate this weekend and is likely to pass. So that is a big, big victory for Joe Biden and his various democratic policies and colleagues.
Thanks for that, John. That's our correspondent, John Terrett, live in New York.
And John Terrett has led us seamlessly on to our next story, because as he was alluding to, the Bank of England has warned the UK is heading for a recession as it raised borrowing rates to the highest level in 27 years, citing inflation set to hit 13% later this year. That's the highest since 1980.
Millions of households are facing a cost of living crisis with difficult choices between paying for food or heating.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Andrew Wilson. John Terrett was talking about economists in the US getting their forecast wrong. There'll be plenty of people in the UK hoping dearly the Bank of England got their forecast wrong. What is the fallout 24 hours on from the Bank of England statements?
Really interesting to hear John there talking about the candour of the Governor of the Bank of England, coming out with these astonishing admissions of 5 consecutive quarters of recession. This is what we're looking at. He was quite clear about the headwinds that the UK is facing and what he believes is the way to tackle it. Put up interest rates a bit, to try and tackle inflation a while, sit it out, wait for inflation to come down. He was also quite clear that the problems they're facing are external. It's the leftovers from the pandemic, it's the artificial economy that was created by the furlough schemes and the support and all that, and difficulty of making decisions about where to move forwards as that was tapering off at the end of last summer. And, of course, this war in Ukraine, started by Russia, also having this extraordinary impact on energy prices. So, as far as the Bank of England's governor is concerned, that's what I've been landed with. I'm the guy who has to pull the levers, and funnily enough, since 1997, when they were given this mandate, they haven't really had to pull these levers. This time he has yanked on the big one, 0.5% up, with these dire predictions, and of course already people are coming out of the woodwork saying he should have done this earlier, it's too little, too late, and all the rest of it. But as you'll see from my report, Andrew Bailey is sticking to his guns. The Bank of England has left the country in no doubt of the economic perils ahead. The interest rate hike was underpinned by the promise of soaring inflation and a recession to start this year and swallow 2023 as well.
GDP growth in the UK has slowed and the economy is now forecast to enter recession later this year.
The governor blamed energy prices caused by war in Europe, but the public is already reeling from the astronomical profits posted by oil and gas companies recently cashing in on wholesale prices. The first grain cargo to leave Ukraine, bound for the UK, might point to other commodities coming down, but the ship is simply what it appears to be, a drop in the ocean.
A lot of the path for inflation will depend on external factors. It depends on how the war in Ukraine plays out, depends on the path for commodity prices, and it depends on whether these supply chain issues ease out over time.
Not much from the government. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is on holiday, and there was a brief statement from the new finance minister, leaving those old enough to remember again the early 70s, when the lights went out, shops and factories closed, and the country waited in the dark for better times to come. It's the two leadership candidates left to do the explaining in their debates, with Foreign Secretary Liz Truss sticking to optimism.
Well, what the Bank of England have said today is, of course, extremely worrying. But it is not inevitable. We can change the outcome and we can make it more likely that the economy grows.
While former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak insisted he really was the only one left to tackle such a crisis.
We in the Conservative Party need to get real and fast, because the lights on the economy are flashing red and the root cause is inflation. Now, I'm worried that Liz Truss's plans will make the situation worse.
The impacts are external, and it's almost all about the lack of Russian gas. Public messages are out across the EU telling people to save their energy at home and on the roads. In this German city, they've already turned the lights off in public buildings. The wake-up call for the UK has come a little later, but it's out there now and hard for the next Prime Minister to ignore.
And Andrew, you mentioned that Andrew Bailey's faced some criticism, but the Bank of England's come under fire as well. It is independent. Questions about whether it should have acted sooner.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Bailey's already been tackled on this in the media, and they've said to him, why didn't you act sooner? He said, who could have predicted a war in Russia? And they said, well, inflation was already up 4% in December last year, 5% in January. Why didn't you act? He says, we did. We've put interest rates up by 0.5%, 6 times so far. So people say, well, you've been too gradual. But of course, we've got a leadership competition on at the moment, and there's politics getting involved. As I said before, the Bank of England has made this big gesture. They pulled a big lever, and now everyone wants feedback from the two candidates. Liz Truss has come out fighting. Her camp are saying, implying that Andrew Bailey acted too slowly, that perhaps even this whole mess is down to Rishi Sunak's pandemic budgets and the Bank of England's slowness to react. So the Truss camp is already coming out with, we think it's time to renegotiate the mandate, renegotiate the deal with the Bank of England, between the Treasury and the Bank of England. The Bank of England is supposed to be basically independent to deal with pricing, to deal with inflation. Perhaps now Liz Truss's team is saying it's time to look at all that again. It's not clear whether this is a case of point scoring, whether this is a case of Truss's camp trying to simply paint her as someone disconnected with the whole mess, or if she's really got something in mind. We haven't seen much in the way of detail yet. One theory being put out by the Sunak camp is that perhaps Liz Truss's fondness for tax cuts sprinkle a little happy dust around the place as soon as you become Prime Minister, and while everyone's thinking that you're quite a good egg after all, go for an early election.
Yeah, still lots of questions about the economic policies of both of these candidates. Who will one of them become Prime Minister? Andrew, thank you. But what does a slowing global economy mean for businesses?
The advertising guru Sir Martin Sorrell, once the longest-serving CEO of a FTSE 100 company, has been reflecting on the impending recession with CGTN's Juliet Mann.
I think we had a very strong bullish run, not just in the West but in the East too. There has been an adjustment. There had to be an adjustment. There's been a cyclical adjustment. I think this is a cyclical recession. I don't think it's structural, and I don't think it's event-driven like COVID in 2020. So I think this is a cyclical recession. It may be, from what you see in it here, longer. I don't think it's going to be phenomenally deep. When people start to talk about stagflation, what they're sort of indicating is there'll be very slow growth, but with price inflation. I think it will last for some time. I think the game has changed, and you have to be much more selective geographically, and much more focused on technology. I mean, what will bail us out of all this is technological advance.
And you can see more of that interview on the agenda with Juliet Mann this weekend here on CGTN.
The Chinese property giant Evergrande says it'll receive $818 million after cancelling a contract to buy land rights for a new football stadium. Construction of the stadium, which was for a top-tier team, Guangzhou FC, began in 2020. Evergrande bought control of the football team in 2010. The company is heavily in debt, and that money from the deal will now be used to help make payments.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a long, hot summer and why low river levels are leaving German shipping up the creek.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Nawied Jabarkhyl. Our top stories. China cuts high-level military ties with the United States and suspends other cooperation following the controversial visit to Taiwan of United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
America's working. More than 500,000 new jobs added to the world's biggest economy. Unemployment in the US is the lowest it's been in 50 years.
Turkey's President Erdogan meets Vladimir Putin in Russia, with Ukraine and Syria dominating their talks.
Firefighters in France are continuing to battle blazes in the southwest of the country. Last month, wildfires forced almost 40,000 people to leave their homes.
Campsites and holiday parks were destroyed at the height of the summer season, and the government says it wants to plant 1 billion trees to try to replenish burnt forests. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
The smell of smoke hangs in the air among the ash-coated campsites. The Dune de Pilat region of France was ravaged by wildfires in July. The scorched ruins of caravans, buildings burnt and collapsed, metal wrought in the intensity of the blaze. For the emergency services, this was a violent fire, difficult to access and made harder to battle due to extreme weather conditions.
When the fire started, we were in a heatwave period with very dry vegetation, which was especially combustible. During our operations, we were also faced with difficult and violent winds, which didn't always blow the same way, but which changed direction regularly and also changed in strength.
Nearby, this campsite was evacuated as a precaution. Fortunately, the flames stopped just short. It was a very close call and one that had an economic impact.
Fires cause a major drop in activity for all businesses. Several places have been impacted. Some restaurants by the lake completely burnt down. It's high season, in the middle of summer, and sports clubs and kids clubs had to close. Lots of people cancelled their reservations. So yes, it's a serious fall in income.
The Dune de Pilat fire was not the only blaze in the region. At the same time, an hour's drive away, another fire was sweeping through the forest in Londiras. After burning through thousands of hectares of land, the Londiras fire is now considered under control, but not over, because there are still hotspots here on the ground where the fire could restart. The fire brigade continues to respond to reports of new blazes, while helicopters monitor the area from the skies.
The firefighters did a remarkable job because they saved almost all of the houses in the fire zone. There were 1,600 houses in the path of the fire and only 2 burnt down, so it was amazing what they did. The president of the region of Gironde, where both these fires took place, says the blazes this year were historic and there needs to be an improved plan to fight future fires.
Look, even President Macron accepts that in France there are not enough firefighting aircraft. It used to be mainly the southeast that suffered from fires, but now, due to climate change, the major blazes are happening further north each year. So we must have more planes, more helicopters, and there must be a number of them stationed here in this region throughout the summer.
The blackened trees and the carpet of ash are a lasting reminder of when the forest was ablaze. And there are fears the climate emergency will only increase the intensity and frequency of the fires in the future. Ross Cullen, CGTN in Gironde, southwest France.
Well, record summer temperatures are drying Europe's rivers. One of the busiest inland shipping routes is reducing capacity because of a lack of depth for fully loaded ships.
The falling water levels are causing concern in Germany, where power plants and heavy industry rely on river transport. Our correspondent Trent Murray reports.
Well, facing a shortage of gas supplies from Russia, Germany is increasingly turning to coal to help boost power generation and prepare the country for possible energy shortages over the winter. But now a new challenge is emerging, with high temperatures and a lack of rain causing difficulties in the way coal is delivered to key power plants. The Rhine River is one of the main routes for coal to get into the country, with barges travelling along the 1,300-kilometre stretch of water, which snakes all the way from Switzerland to the North Sea. But low water levels are now making it hard for fully loaded barges to traverse the river. In fact, the situation has become so serious, 2 of Germany's main coal power plants have warned they may have to cut capacity because they can't get enough supplies delivered. Staudinger 5, which sits east of Frankfurt, and Datteln in North Rhine-Westphalia account for almost 5% of the country's coal power generation between them. With Europe's hot, dry summer causing river levels to fall, the power industry says the long-term outlook remains uncertain. The Rhine is critical for getting fuel supplies from major seaports in Amsterdam, Rotterdam and Antwerp down into the industrial heartland of Western Germany. But barges using the river are now having to sail only partially loaded, fueling demand for the largest vessels and pushing up transport costs overall. All at a time when wholesale electricity prices are already at record highs. It's not just Germany feeling the heat. France also relies on the Rhine to help cool several of its nuclear power plants. Recent warm weather has pushed up water temperatures, meaning several of those plants have now had to reduce capacity. It's yet another challenge for Europe's energy infrastructure as it tries to adapt to the hot weather now, while at the same time prepare for the cold weather in coming months. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
So extreme weather events have been causing problems this summer in many parts of the world, as we've been reporting. The UK has had its driest 8-month spell since the year 1976, and now limits are being placed on the amount of water that people can use. With heat waves and wildfires across Europe, climate experts say temperatures are rising faster than expected.
Frederica Otto is from the Grantham Institutes for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London. She's been speaking to our business correspondent, Juliette Mann.
The emissions of greenhouse gases in the last decade have risen faster than in the decades before, and so the global temperatures have increased faster in the last decade than in the decades before. So what we are seeing in global temperatures is exactly what we had expected. What that means for heat waves is that every heat wave that is occurring today has been made more likely and more intense because of human-induced climate change. But this change in intensity and likelihood of heat waves is not equal across the globe. But for example, in Europe, we see a much stronger increase than in the US and in other parts of the world. And partly this is due to things like in the Mediterranean region, for example, we also have a drying that increases the increase in temperature. Partly this can be explained in some parts through urbanization, but the exact reason for this discrepancy in Europe compared to the rest of the world, we don't know yet. This summer, this Northern Hemispheric summer and last year and the year before, we have had many heat waves across Europe, the US, China, Japan. Earlier this year, we had a very large heat wave in India. We never hear about heat waves in Africa, but that's not because they are not occurring, but because they are not reported. So heat waves have increased absolutely dramatically, and they are killers. So heat waves have led to increase in death in Germany in the last 2 years of about 8,000 to 9,000 people. In the UK, in the last few years, it's about 3,000 people. And that's just the places where we do have the numbers. So heat waves are really something we need to take more serious. And we need to decrease our vulnerability to heat waves.
Those numbers that you've just given are pretty stark. So, I mean, are we doomed to more frequent extreme weather events, or are there measures and things that governments, that businesses, that citizens can do?
I think it's really, really important to highlight that we are not doomed. We have all the agency we need to address climate change, but we have to use this agency. So we have to stop as fast as possible to burn fossil fuels so that global temperatures are not rising faster. And we need to adapt to these changes that we see, particularly in heat waves, but also in for example, heavy rainfall events. And adaptation, that's also really important to highlight. doesn't just mean to build a wall. You can't really build a wall against heat. But adaptation means to reduce vulnerability. And that primarily means reducing inequality across our societies, globally, but also within every city, every country.
At least 7 people have been killed and dozens injured after Israel launched a series of strikes on the Gaza Strip. Israel says a senior commander of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group has been killed. Gaza's health ministry has declared a state of emergency. The strikes come after Israel arrested a senior Palestinian militant leader during raids in the occupied West Bank on Monday.
At least 13 people have been killed and dozens injured in a fire at a nightclub in Thailand. Panic erupted at the Mountain Bee nightclub in eastern Chonburi province, southeast of the capital Bangkok. Video posted online showed revelers in a frenzy as they tried to flee, while flames tore through the roof.
Viktor Orbán has called on Hungarian and US conservatives to join forces in 2024 elections to take back Brussels and Washington from what he calls liberals who threaten Western civilization. Orbán, who has a close relationship with the former US President Donald Trump, also said the US needs a strong leader to negotiate a peace deal for Russia to end the war in Ukraine.
A jury in Texas has handed US conspiracy theorist Alex Jones a $4.1 million fine over his false allegations the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax. The jury said Jones must pay compensation for spreading conspiracy theories about the 2012 shooting. Lawyers for the parents of one child killed are also seeking additional damages.
French officials are racing to save a beluga whale spotted in the River Seine after it strayed thousands of miles from its Arctic Ocean habitat. Marine conservationists fear the animal, described as worryingly thin, could starve if it stays in the waterway which flows through Paris.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take at some of them.
2 new asteroids have been discovered near Earth by the Purple Mountain Observatory. Scientists say one has a diameter of 230 meters. China's carbon monitoring satellite has been upgraded to improve its ability to survey and map emissions. Ding Jing of Peking University has won the gold medal at the Chinese Mathematics Awards for solving several long-standing problems in mathematical physics. The Great Wall of China has been morphed into a roll of film on the poster for the annual Beijing Film Awards. Couples celebrated the Shiji Festival, Chinese Valentine's Day, with the traditional gift of flowers, boosting sales across the country. And a 22-year-old who lost his leg at the age of 12, inspired by the Paralympics, now aims to compete in Paris 2024.
You can see all that and more at cgtn.com.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, old and cold. Nursing homes in Slovenia face 8-fold electricity price rises. Elderly residents urge the government to intervene.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strains supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, our special series Crunch Time shows how ordinary Europeans are feeling the heat.
In Slovenia, electricity prices have rocketed in recent months. Retirement homes have been hard hit and are now asking for help from the government. Our correspondent Alyosha Malenkovic reports.
At Slovenia's top retirement home, the manager showed CGTN 2 months of electricity bills. Last December, they paid around 5,800 euros.
And this is an invoice from January this year, and it cost 40,800. And this is 780% more than we paid in last year. And no one didn't explain to us why.
That's when the headache started for the tenants of this state-owned retirement home in the town of Domžale, close to the capital Ljubljana. Since the end of the last year, electricity provider Petrol listed this retirement home as a commercial user. That was a reason for the unusual electricity price hike. Due to the unique way of paying their bills, the pensioners in this retirement home received up to 10 times higher electricity bills.
I am alone, and my pension is for a normal life, let's say, enough. But it's not for these expenses. I have some savings, but when I spend them, I don't know what is next. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I would have to sell the apartment.
This retirement home is the first in Slovenia to face such a problem, as their contract with the supplier expired first. Soon, other retirement homes in the country would face the same issue.
The problems would persist, but they can be solved. The thing is that a lot of energy providers are using this situation to increase the prices.
The manager of this retirement home puts the blame on how the electrical energy market works.
In Slovenia, we produce for 85% electricity by ourselves. But we sold this electricity to the European stock market. And then we have to buy it back with different prices. So this is an anomaly in European Union organization.
It is hard for Primož to understand why the electricity price has increased so much for them. Tenants are demanding answers for the energy price hikes, yet it is hard to imagine the elderly and barely moving citizens of the country rallying in front of the government. So it is up to Primož and a few who understand the gravity of the situation to try to help those who for their entire lives pay their dues to society. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Radolca in Slovenia.
Let's take you to Greece next, where labour shortages are damaging the country's economic recovery. The government there says more than 200,000 positions remain vacant.
It's thought many left their jobs and didn't return after the pandemic. So why aren't Greeks going back to work? Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas has been taking a look.
The neighborhood of Berama to the south of Athens is the heart of Greece's shipyard industry. It's here where Stefanos runs his yacht repair and maintenance business, sending ships across the country. Although he's faced many problems, including Greece's decade-long financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, finding help is proving even more difficult.
We need an extra pair of hands, and we're currently in the process to find someone. This whole area is in need. Anywhere you ask, there's a job opening, but people tend to choose jobs, especially after the pandemic. That's a luxury. Look, if you're in real need of money, you'll find a job. It seems that people have the luxury of choice, and if it's not what they like, they don't work.
Visiting any island or beach resort, you'll notice that most popular tourist destinations are almost at capacity, full of people. What you won't notice is that 50,000 positions remain vacant, creating a shortage. But other industries are suffering even more. Coming out of the pandemic, Greece joined the EU's Recovery and Resilience Facility. Its aim to bring investments with EU funds and to create minimum wage jobs. Real jobs have been created, but no one is applying. Out of all the side effects of the coronavirus pandemic, this might be the one that affects the economy the most. Thousands of Greeks are staying away from minimum wage jobs in retail stores, restaurants, and construction. Close to 200,000 low-paid positions remain empty, with folks not interested in filling them.
I don't mind working as long as the workplace respects me. I will work anywhere, but I want to do it to have a life, not only to survive.
Listen, you can't ask me to work for €2 an hour and expect me to do it. I'm not skilled, and say I agree to do the job, I won't get the stamps, my sick days won't be paid, and no holidays. Why would I go? Just to say I have a job?
But it's not only older people that are not applying. Youngsters seem not really happy with the conditions.
The conditions represent the minimum wage of our country. It's simply horrible.
Why did I study all these years? So I can end up having a job that I wouldn't get paid the same money with someone that hasn't even finished high school?
Labor shortages are everywhere, from tourism to hospitality and construction. Greek authorities have been accelerating the recruitment efforts, but the head of a professional body that acts as a middleman between workers and the government says their approach needs to change.
The government should change their approach and subsidise employment and not unemployment. So, instead of collecting a welfare cheque for not working, collect a cheque for working, to provide a motive for someone to find a job, and once they do, reward them. The idea is not to create a culture of living off the state.
This might benefit both the government and the economy, but until a solution is found to fill in the gap, help in low-skilled, low-paid, and often unsecure jobs will remain wanted. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
All of those stories from our Economic Impact series are on a special page on our website. That's europe.cgtn.com.
Football's English Premier League will celebrate its 30th anniversary when it returns for a new season in just a couple of hours. Crystal Palace host Arsenal in the opening fixture of 2022-23. Since its launch in 1992, the Premier League has become the most watched football division around the world and the third most profitable sporting league globally, with each season generating around $10 billion in revenue.
Well, the return of the Premier League comes just days after England's women claimed a historic European Championship. It's hoped the Lionesses' success can boost crowds at Women's Super League matches and increase opportunities for girls wanting to get involved in football at school. Joanne Linton is chair of Western Mendip FC, the largest independent girls' and ladies' football club in the UK's southwest. Thank you for joining us, Joanne. So these figures coming out this week showing only 6 in 10 schools in the UK currently offer football in PE lessons for girls. Why is that so low?
Do you know what? I'm not really sure. I expect it's probably down to the infrastructure, the training that they've got within the schools. I certainly know there's an interest for girls. We get given a lot of inquiries from the schools. So I think there must be something in the school system that's perhaps stopping that, the girls given the opportunity to play.
And if girls are looking to play football, then what sort of ecosystem exists at the moment for young girls looking to get into the sport?
So the FA have worked really hard over the last few years, well, many years now, to build up, helped by FIFA, so with funding to get girls to come into football. And they usually start off with Wildcats, which is a real grassroots level. We get a lot of inquiries from schools directing their girls to our Wildcat centres, as I'm sure lots of clubs do across the country. So that's the starting point. Then by the time they get to secondary school, they'll be interested in playing a bit more competitively, and starting to really excel in the sport. At that point, we offer them the pathway through to the competitive age group teams. And from there, then the FA have designed a further pathway to get them onto the England training pathway. So there's a real good structure in place through the grassroots and through the FA. At the moment, I feel there is a bit of a gap between how the schools can support that.
And historically speaking, you've looked at this over many years. How far of a journey has women's football made in the UK to culminate in that historic victory at Euro 2022?
It's been fantastic, hasn't it? And to see the women up there on the big stage and really performing and bringing home the trophy is exactly what we've all been working towards for many years now. I've been involved in women's football for over 20 years. I didn't have the opportunity to play myself, so that's one of the reasons why I've been so passionate about giving all young girls the opportunity to play. And it really has come a long way. You know, you can see that from how successful we've now been.
And there was an incredible buzz nationwide around England women's campaign at the Euros. It was interesting to see the players say that they wanted a legacy to be left behind. What's the key to ensure all the talk doesn't just fizzle out and that real, lasting change is brought about?
I think there's two aspects to it. I think getting into the schools and getting the teachers to encourage the girls to play and giving them that opportunity to participate on an equal footing with the boys, that is obviously key. And the other bit is to encourage all the fans to go and watch the games now, filtered down through the WSL, through the other leagues, and really get an interest, a really big interest and a fan base across all of the women's football.
And just briefly, if you will, Joanne, government ministers were at that final taking selfies. What role do you think the government plays here? What policy changes are required?
I think they've got a fantastic opportunity to take advantage of the attitude of the nation in supporting women and girls football and really doing something with the education system to give all girls the opportunity to play. We know how important it is that girls are physically and emotionally active and their mental well-being, and we know that sport gives girls that and how it helps build resilience. So yeah, there's a real opportunity for them to be able to move forward with this and do something good.
Great, thank you for your time. That's Joanne Linton, Chair of Western Mendip Football Club.
And women's football is also increasingly popular in China, where 70,000 viewers watched England win Euro 2022, something the Chinese Football Association described as very rare. One club that fans will be keen to keep an eye on is the Scottish women's team Celtic. They announced the signing of Chinese left-winger Shen Menglu this week on a 2-year contract. She'll join compatriot Shen Mengyu at the Glasgow side, who last year became the first ever Chinese player to sign for a professional club in the United Kingdom.
A look at our headlines once again. China cuts high-level military talks with the United States and suspends other cooperation, including climate talks following the controversial visit to Taiwan by US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Well, in the last few moments, the United Nations, its Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned there's no way to tackle climate change without effective dialogue between China and the US.
And that is just about it for Global Business Europe for today and this week. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.